In the 1990s, I was hired by Sega to be a member of their rating board. And what I was asked to do was to rate their games that were going to be released, for their violent content. So they would actually send me videotapes showing the game being played, and I would see only the most violent segments of the games. And though I was asked to do a very simple rating, this process made me raise a number of more complex questions. I wondered, for example, was it really better to have these violent images? Was it better for them to be full of blood and gore? Or was it better for them to omit the blood and gore? In a way, you could say that the blood and the gore would seem to make them more violent. But on the other hand, if you omit it, it would make it seem that this violence had no consequences, no painful consequences. And that's a real problem too. Another issue that came up when I was rating those games was the question of who was actually inflicting the violence and who was the victim. Was this decision based on gender? Because in fact, very frequently it was males inflicting violence on women. Or was it racial? Did these games pit one race against another, one gender against another? Another issue was, what was the narrative context for the violence? Now, in many video games, the narrative is very minimal. It just sort of sets up the basic premise, and then it's a matter of twitch and kill, where you're trying to shoot anything that moves without much consideration of the narrative. But really, the narrative context can transform that. When I was teaching in Sweden one year, I had a number of students who were from all around the world, and I had this one student whom I'll never forget. He was from Spain. He was a computer science student studying in Sweden, and he proposed a project for a game in which you had this kind of twitch and kill violence, where one would just immediately shoot anyone that moved, but he put it in the context of the Spanish Civil War, as if you just came home. This was the narrative premise. You've just come home to your village in the Basque region, and you don't know who's on which side, and you see this crossfire, and you're terrified, and you don't really know which side you're shooting against. So he created this narrative premise that really problematized this whole notion of twitching and killing.